The city park bench, usually her lunchtime sanctuary, feels particularly exposed today. Clara unwraps her sandwich, tuna on whole wheat, a testament to her thrilling culinary life, and sighs. Another rejection email for a manuscript she'd poured her soul into. Another day feeling like a well-meaning cog in a very boring machine. That's when she sees him, the man who's been occupying the far end of the adjacent bench for the past week. He's unkempt, is the kindest word. Clothes rumpled, hair a wind-whipped landscape, but it's his eyes that always snag her attention. They're a startling, clear gray, intelligent and weary, and right now, they're fixed on a discarded newspaper with an intensity that seems too profound for yesterday's sports scores. Today, however, he's not reading. He's just sitting, his hands clasped loosely, a faint tremor in them. He looks thinner than last week, an almost imperceptible hunger pinch around his mouth. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you believe love should feel like freedom, hit that like button and subscribe. Clara's own half-eaten sandwich suddenly feels like a decadent feast. Her mother's voice, a gentle but firm echo from her childhood, whispers, "Kindness costs nothing, Clara." He had no idea who she really was, this quiet woman with her sad eyes and shared sandwiches, and she, in turn, knew even less about the man whose gaze seemed to hold forgotten kingdoms. And just like that, an impulse, sharp and undeniable, pricked through her usual caution. Clara stood, a little awkwardly, her half-eaten sandwich in one hand. She approached him slowly, like one might approach a startled deer. "Excuse me," she said, her voice softer than she intended. He looked up, those gray eyes widening almost imperceptibly. There was no suspicion in them, just a quiet surprise. I made too much lunch." A blatant lie. Her lunch was meticulously portioned. "Would you like half a sandwich?" He stared at the offered sandwich, then at her face, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Pride, perhaps, or just deep exhaustion. Then, a slow smile touched his lips, transforming his face, making him look younger, almost boyish despite the grime and the weariness. "That's very kind of you," he said, his voice raspy from disuse but surprisingly cultured. He reached out a hand, calloused but clean, and accepted the offering. "Thank you." She retreated to her bench, heart thumping a little. It was a small gesture, utterly insignificant in the grand scheme of the city's indifference, yet it felt monumental. He ate slowly, methodically, savoring each bite. Clara found herself watching him, not with pity, but with a strange, burgeoning curiosity. And just like that, a stranger with smoke-gray eyes and a voice like old velvet became the most interesting part of her day. Clara worked as a junior editor for a small, struggling publishing house that specialized in academic texts nobody read. Her days were a quiet hum of comma splices and bibliographic inconsistencies, punctuated by the lukewarm coffee from the office machine. Her apartment was small, neat, and filled with books, her true companions. She had a cat, a portly tabby named Marlowe, who offered sphinx-like wisdom in exchange for tuna and chin scratches. Her life wasn't bad, just muted. A watercolor painting when she yearned for oils. She told her friend Chloe about the man on the bench. Chloe, ever pragmatic, had raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Clara, darling, you can't just go around adopting strays. Two-legged or four-legged." "I didn't adopt him," Clara had protested. "I just shared my lunch." "And next, you'll be knitting him a scarf," Chloe had predicted, though her tone was fond. The encounter, however, had dislodged something in Clara. A small pebble of dissatisfaction that had been sitting quietly in her gut for years. She found herself thinking about the man's eyes, the unexpected grace in his acceptance of her small offering. A few days later, a headline on a discarded newspaper in the coffee shop caught her eye. "Tech billionaire Julian Vance still missing. Family pleads for information." The photo was grainy, a candid shot of a man with dark, intense eyes, a determined jaw, looking uncomfortable in a suit. There was a resemblance, a faint echo of the bone structure she'd seen in the man on the bench, but it was too wild a thought. Billionaires didn't end up on park benches, sharing tuna sandwiches. Or did they? The idea was so absurd, she dismissed it almost immediately. Her park, felt different now. The scent of damp earth after an early morning shower, the distant thrum of city traffic, the chirping of sparrows, it all seemed sharper, more vibrant. She found herself looking for him each lunchtime, a little knot of anticipation in her stomach. She was beginning to feel a sliver of, not safety, perhaps, but a certain quiet anticipation in these shared, silent moments. This fragile connection was a tiny bloom in the concrete landscape of her routine, and she was terrified something would crush it. The next day, he was there again, and the day after. Each time, Clara brought a little extra, an apple, a cookie, sometimes a whole sandwich, wrapped separately. They didn't talk much. Sometimes a shared observation about the weather, a comment on a particularly boisterous squirrel. But a comfortable silence settled between them, a fragile truce with the world. He never asked for anything. He simply accepted what she offered with a quiet dignity that both touched and puzzled her. There was an inherent grace about him, a fineness to his features beneath the grime, a way he held himself that hinted at a different life. His hands, though calloused, were long-fingered, elegant. He spoke in complete sentences, his vocabulary surprisingly rich. One Tuesday, after she'd handed him a thermos of soup and a crusty roll, he didn't immediately start eating. He looked at her, a long, considering look that made her blush. "You're very kind," he said, his voice less raspy now. "It's just soup," Clara mumbled, fiddling with the strap of her bag. "No," he said softly. "It's more than that." He reached into the inner pocket of his worn jacket, the one that looked like it had seen several wars and lost all of them. He pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook, its cover softened and scarred with age. It was tied shut with a piece of string. He held it out to her. I want you to have this." Clara stared at it. "What is it?" "It's just some thoughts. Things I've written down. Maybe they'll mean something to someone. To you." His gaze was intense, almost pleading. "There's a letter inside for you. Please, take it." Her hand trembled as she reached for it. The leather was cool and smooth beneath her fingertips. I don't understand." "You will," he said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "Thank you, Clara." He knew her name. She'd never told him. She must have said it aloud to herself, or perhaps he'd overheard her on a phone call. A shiver ran down her spine. The intimacy of him knowing her name, when she knew nothing of his, felt suddenly profound. She clutched the notebook. This felt like a turning point, a threshold. She could hand it back, maintain the careful distance. Or she could open it and step into whatever story it held. The weight of it in her hands felt like a decision already made. She nodded, unable to speak. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod in return, then turned his attention to the soup, as if the transaction had cost him dearly. Back in the sterile quiet of her office, the leather-bound notebook sat on her desk like an unexploded bomb. Her colleagues buzzed around, discussing deadlines and print runs, oblivious to the small earthquake happening in Clara's carefully ordered world. She couldn't concentrate. The worn leather seemed to pulse with a life of its own. During her coffee break, she finally succumbed. Hiding in the rarely used storeroom, surrounded by boxes of outdated encyclopedias, she untied the string. Inside, the pages were filled with a dense, elegant script. It wasn't a diary, not exactly. It was a collection of observations, philosophical musings, sketches of people and places, fragments of poetry. The writing was beautiful, poignant, and achingly sad. Tucked into the middle, as he'd said, was a folded sheet of paper, thicker than the notebook pages, with her name, Clara, written on the front in the same elegant hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it. "Dear Clara," it began. Asterisk, if you are reading this, it means I have found someone with a capacity for kindness that I had begun to believe no longer existed in this world. I don't expect you to understand, nor do I ask for your pity. My circumstances are complicated, and largely of my own making, or perhaps my own escaping. Star. The letter went on to describe, in veiled but evocative terms, a life of immense privilege and crushing expectation. A world of gilded cages, a familial duty that felt more like a prison sentence. He wrote of a creative spirit stifled, of a deep yearning for authenticity in a world that valued only appearances. He didn't name names or places, but the picture he painted was vivid and heartbreaking. "I have been trying to disappear," he wrote, asterisk, to shed a skin that never truly fit. "But it seems my past has a longer reach than I anticipated. They're looking for me. Not out of concern, I fear, but out of a desire to control, to reclaim what they consider their property." Star. Then came the part that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. Asterisk, there is a small cottage, a place I once found solace, detailed on the last page of this journal. If anything should happen to me, if I am unable to continue my journey, I would ask a great favor. Take what is useful from my writings. Perhaps there is a story there that deserves to be told by someone with a gentler heart than the world I fled. Or perhaps it is merely the ramblings of a desperate man. I entrust it to your judgment and your kindness, which has been a singular light in a great darkness. Star. He signed it only with an initial, *J. Star. Clara's hands were shaking. This wasn't just a notebook. It was a life, entrusted to her. The man on the bench, J, was not who he seemed. He was articulate, educated, and clearly running from something significant. The newspaper headline about the missing billionaire, Julian Vance, flashed in her mind again. Could it be? The initial J. The description of a stifled creative spirit. It was too coincidental. She flipped to the last page of the journal. There, in meticulous detail, was a hand-drawn map. It showed a winding country road, a creek, a cluster of trees, and a small square marked the Hermitage. Beneath it, coordinates and a cryptic note, key under the third stone by the oak. Her lunch break was long over. She felt dazed, overwhelmed. She had to find him, to talk to him. But when she rushed back to the park, her heart pounding, his bench was empty. He was gone. Only a few pigeon feathers drifted on the spot where he usually sat. A cold dread washed over her. If anything should happen to me, his words echoed in her mind. Clara spent the rest of the afternoon in a fog, unable to focus on misplaced modifiers or dangling participles. The weight of the journal in her bag was immense. She reread the letter countless times, each reading deepening her conviction that J was indeed Julian Vance, the missing billionaire. The news reports had been vague, hinting at a family dispute and concerns for his erratic behavior. Now, seen through the lens of his letter, it painted a different picture, a man desperate for freedom. That evening, instead of her usual quiet night with Marlowe and a book, Clara found herself pacing her small apartment. The journal lay open on her coffee table. The map to the Hermitage seemed to beckon. It was insane. She was a junior editor, not an investigative journalist or a rescuer of troubled billionaires. And yet, his words, *, a singular light in a great darkness. * he had trusted her, chosen her. She thought of her own unfulfilled dreams, her own quiet desperation for something more, something authentic. Perhaps helping him was a way of helping herself. The next morning, Clara called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. She packed a small overnight bag, the journal, and a printout of the area around the coordinates from the map. She told Chloe she was going on a spontaneous nature retreat. Chloe, after a moment of stunned silence, had just said, "Well, it's about time. Don't get eaten by bears. We're charming sociopaths." The drive took several hours, leading her away from the city's gray embrace into rolling hills and vibrant autumn foliage. Following the hand-drawn map, which proved surprisingly accurate, she found herself on a narrow, unpaved road. And there, nestled in a small clearing, shaded by an ancient oak tree, was a tiny, rustic cottage. The Hermitage. It looked deserted, but not derelict. There was a neat stack of firewood by the door, and the small porch was swept clean. Her heart pounded as she approached the oak tree. The third stone. She knelt, her fingers tracing the cool, mossy surface. Underneath it, glinting dully, was an old iron key. It fit the lock. The door creaked open into a single, cozy room. A stone fireplace, a simple wooden table and chairs, a narrow bed tucked into an alcove, and shelves crammed with books. It was Spartan, but peaceful. And on the table, a fresh loaf of bread, a wedge of cheese, and a note. Clara, I hoped you would come. I had to be sure I wasn't followed. There's more to this than I could write. Please, wait for me. J. Relief washed over her, so potent it made her knees weak. He was alive. He was here, or would be soon. She sank into one of the chairs, the scent of wood smoke and old paper enveloping her. She had stepped through the looking-glass. She didn't have to wait long. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in hues of purple and rose, she heard footsteps outside. The door opened, and he stood there, silhouetted against the fading light. He was cleaner now, his hair damp as if freshly washed, wearing simple, practical clothes that looked new. He was still lean, but the haunted look in his eyes had softened, replaced by a cautious hope. "Clara," he said, his voice no longer raspy, but a warm baritone that resonated in the small space. "Jay," she replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "Or should I call you Julian?" A shadow crossed his face. "Julian Vance is a name I'm trying to leave behind." He stepped inside, closing the door, shutting out the encroaching night. Thank you for coming. And for believing me, or at least, being curious enough to see for yourself. Your letter, it was compelling, she admitted. And the man I shared my lunch with didn't seem like someone who wrote just thoughts. He gave a wry smile. No, I suppose not. He gestured to the bread and cheese. I hope you're hungry. It's not much, but it's real. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire he'd quickly kindled in the hearth and the chirping of crickets outside. The small cabin felt like a sanctuary, a world away from everything. Why me? Clara finally asked, the question that had been burning in her mind. Why give the journal, the letter, to a stranger? Julian looked into the fire, his expression thoughtful. I've been surrounded by people my whole life, Clara. Family, employees, acquaintances. But I'm not sure any of them ever truly saw me. They saw a name, a fortune, a role to be played. You saw a hungry man on a bench, and you offered him food, with no expectation of anything in return. That simple act of kindness, of humanity, it was more genuine than anything I'd experienced in years. I needed to know if that kind of selfless empathy still existed. And I needed someone outside my world, someone with no agenda, to know my truth, in case. In case what? She prompted gently. In case they found me and tried to drag me back, or worse, declare me incompetent to manage my own life and affairs because I chose to walk away from theirs. His voice was low, laced with a weary bitterness. My family, they equate wealth with happiness, control with love. I was suffocating. He explained more about his life, the immense pressure to take over the family corporation, a business he had no interest in, the arranged engagement to a woman who was more interested in the Vance name than in Julian the man, the constant scrutiny, the lack of freedom. He'd meticulously planned his escape, siphoning off a small, untraceable fund, and then simply walking away, trying to lose himself in the anonymity of the city. The homeless persona had been an extreme measure, a way to observe the world stripped of all pretense. I was an experiment, then? Clara asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Julian met her gaze, his gray eyes earnest. No, not an experiment. You were a lifeline. When I saw you day after day, with your quiet sadness and your books, offering a piece of your lunch, you reminded me that there was still goodness, still quiet dignity in the world. I didn't plan to give you the journal initially, but the longer I stayed, the more I realized the risks. And I thought, if anyone could understand the story within those pages, the yearning for something more, it would be you. Clara felt a blush creep up her neck. He had seen her, too, her own quiet longings. Over the next few days, a strange and wonderful rhythm established itself. They talked for hours, sharing stories, dreams, and fears. Julian, it turned out, was a gifted writer, his journal filled with observations so sharp and prose so beautiful it made Clara's editorial heart ache with pleasure and a touch of envy. He was also surprisingly practical, chopping wood, tending a small vegetable patch behind the cottage, his earlier helplessness on the park bench a deliberate shedskin. He cooked simple meals, surprisingly adept, and they ate by the fire, the conversation flowing easily. Clara found herself laughing more than she had in years. There was a dry wit to Julian, a gentle humor that surfaced now that the weariness had begun to recede. She helped him organize his notes, an idea forming in her mind. His story, his real story, not the sensationalized headlines, deserved to be told. One afternoon, they were sitting on the porch, the autumn sun warm on their faces. Julian was sketching in a new notebook Clara had bought him from the nearby village store. She was reading through his original journal, making notes. You know, she said thoughtfully, this isn't just a collection of musings. This is a book. A powerful one. Julian stopped sketching, looking at her with a hesitant hope in his eyes. You think so? I know so, she said firmly. I'm an editor, remember? It needs work, shaping, but the soul of it, it's extraordinary. A slow smile spread across his face. Perhaps that's what I was always meant to do. Not run a corporation, but tell stories. The idyllic piece, however, was fragile. One morning, while Julian was out checking snares he'd set for rabbits, a skill he'd apparently learned from a survival guide, Clara took a walk down the lane to get a signal on her phone. She had a voicemail from Chloe. Clara, where are you? There's a news report. Some private investigators tracked Julian Vance to a small town in this region. They're saying his family is deeply concerned and offering a substantial reward for information leading to his safe return. It sounds less like concern and more like a manhunt. Please, be careful. Clara's blood ran cold. They were close. The fragile bubble of peace around the hermitage was about to burst. She raced back to the cottage, her heart pounding with a new, urgent fear, not just for Julian, but for this nascent connection, this unexpected, tender thing that had begun to grow between them. When Julian returned, his face fell as he saw her expression. She quickly relayed Chloe's message. His jaw tightened. I knew they wouldn't give up easily. My father, he doesn't understand the word, no. What do we do? Clara asked, trying to keep the panic from her voice. Julian paced the small cabin, the old easygoing manner gone, replaced by a grim determination. They'll find this place eventually. It's not as secret as I'd hoped. He stopped, looking at her. Clara, you need to leave. Now. Before they connect you to me. I won't have you dragged into this mess. Leave. The word felt like a punch. Julian, I'm not going to just abandon you. You have a life to get back to, he said, his voice rough. A job. Friends. You can't stay here, hiding with me. It's not fair to you. And what about what I think is fair? She retorted, her own fear now mixed with a surprising surge of anger. You shared your life with me, your words. You trusted me. Did you think I'd just hand it back when things got difficult? His eyes searched hers, a mixture of gratitude and anguish in their depths. Clara. No, she said firmly. We'll figure this out. Together. She took a deep breath. Your story, Julian. The one in this journal. That's your power. Not their money, not their control. Your truth. A new light sparked in his eyes. You mean, publish it? Exactly, she said. Anonymously, at first, if you must. Or under your own name, as a declaration of independence. Let the world hear your voice, not theirs. He was silent for a long moment, then a slow, determined smile spread across his face. Clara, you are astonishing. He stepped towards her, taking her hands. All right, let's fight them with words. The next 24 hours were a flurry of activity. They decided the immediate priority was to get Julian's manuscript, his real story, out into the world. Clara, using her meager savings and a surprisingly good line of credit she hadn't known she possessed, booked Julian a ticket on a small charter flight from a regional airfield to a quiet coastal town in Oregon, a place he'd mentioned once, where an old university friend owned an independent bookstore and offered sanctuary. He would go under an assumed name. Meanwhile, Clara, armed with a digitized copy of his manuscript, now titled The Hermit's Ledger, would return to the city and use her industry contacts, however limited, to find a publisher brave enough to take it on, perhaps even leaking excerpts to sympathetic journalists if necessary. It was a desperate, half-formed plan, but it was their plan. The evening before he was due to leave, a storm rolled in, mirroring the turmoil inside them. Rain lashed against the cottage windows, and the wind howled through the trees. They sat before the fire, the packed bags a somber presence in the corner. I wish, Julian began, then trailed off, looking into the flames. What do you wish? Clara asked softly. He turned to her, his gray eyes luminous in the firelight. I wish we had more time. Here, like this. Me too, she whispered. The air between them crackled with unspoken emotions, with the bittersweet ache of impending separation. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. Her breath hitched. It was a simple touch, yet it carried the weight of everything they had shared, everything they were about to risk. Clara, he said, his voice husky. Whatever happens, thank you. For seeing me. For believing in my words, even when I wasn't sure I did. Your words are worth believing in, Julian, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. And so are you. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. His lips met hers, tentative at first, then deepening into a kiss that was filled with longing, gratitude, and a desperate, hopeful promise. It was a kiss that tasted of wood smoke, rain, and the thrilling, terrifying prospect of a new beginning. When they finally drew apart, the storm outside seemed to have momentarily quieted, as if holding its breath. I will find you again, he vowed, his forehead resting against hers. Once I'm settled. Once it's safe. I'll be waiting, she promised, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and fear. And I'll get your book published. I swear it. The next morning, the world was washed clean by the storm. The air was crisp and cool as Clara drove Julian to the small, rural airfield. There were no dramatic goodbyes, just a lingering handshake that turned into a tight embrace. Be safe, she whispered against his shoulder. You too, he murmured back. And, Clara? Don't stop sharing your metaphorical sandwiches. A faint smile touched his lips. Then he was walking towards the small plane, a solitary figure against the vast morning sky, carrying only a small duffel bag and the hope of a new life. She watched until the plane was a tiny speck, then disappeared. Driving back to the city felt surreal. The Hermitage, Julian, their intense, shared days, it all felt like a dream. But the manuscript on the passenger seat beside her, and the lingering warmth of his kiss, were very real. The confrontation, when it came, was not with Julian's family directly, but with their lawyers. Clara, using a burner phone and encrypted email, had managed to get Julian's manuscript into the hands of Agnes Periwinkle, a famously feisty independent publisher Clara had once interned for. Agnes, smelling a bestseller and a story of genuine human triumph, had pounced on it. Just as the first excerpts were about to be leaked to a respected online literary journal, Clara received a very polite, very chilling visit from two men in expensive suits. They represented the Vance family. They knew about her connection to Julian, perhaps from his brief phone usage or her car being spotted near the airfield. They offered her a substantial sum of money for any information on Julian's whereabouts and for the return of certain personal documents. They hinted delicately at the legal troubles she could face for aiding a vulnerable individual. Clara, heart-pounding but voice surprisingly steady, sat in her tiny apartment, Marlowe purring on her lap as if sensing her need for moral support. She looked at the two men, at their polished shoes and predatory smiles. "Mr. Vance is not vulnerable," she said quietly. "He is a brilliant, capable man who simply wishes to live his own life. And his personal documents, as you call them, are a work of literature that deserves to be read." She showed them the door. The next few weeks were a blur. The Hermit's Ledger was published. It caused an immediate sensation. Critics lauded its honesty, its lyrical prose, its profound insights into the human condition and the gilded cage of extreme wealth. Julian Vance, the missing billionaire, was suddenly Julian Vance, the acclaimed author. His family, faced with a public relations nightmare and a son who was now articulate, celebrated, and clearly in control of his faculties, quietly withdrew their concerns. Clara didn't hear from Julian directly. She knew he needed time. But Agnes passed on messages, gratitude, encouragement, and one that simply read, Oregon Coast. Bookstore called The Wandering Quill. Soon. It was nearly 2 months later, on a crisp November afternoon, that Clara found herself standing outside a charming, ivy-covered bookstore in a small Oregon coastal town. The sign, a whimsical quill pen, creaked gently in the sea breeze. Her heart was a hummingbird in her chest. She pushed open the door. The interior was warm, smelling of old books and brewing coffee. And there, standing by a sunlit window, arranging a display of newly arrived novels, was Julian. He looked different, relaxed, tanned from the coastal sun. He wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans, and he was smiling, a genuine, easy smile as he chatted with an elderly customer. He looked up as the bell over the door jingled. His eyes met Clara's. The smile widened, transformed into something breathtaking. He excused himself from the customer and walked towards her, his gaze never leaving hers. "Clara," he said, his voice filled with a warmth that enveloped her. "Julian," she replied, a shaky smile on her own lips. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, the unspoken words, the shared journey, the months of separation hanging in the air between them. Then, he closed the distance, and his hands found hers, his touch familiar and grounding. "You came," he said softly. "You told me to," she whispered back, her eyes shining. "And I had to see if the coffee here was any better than at the Hermitage." He chuckled, a rich, free sound. "It's marginally better. But the company, I hope, will be infinitely superior." He squeezed her hands. "Thank you, Clara. For everything. For my life. For my words. They were always yours, Julian," she said. "You just needed someone to listen." He drew her closer, and in the quiet sanctuary of the bookstore, surrounded by stories waiting to be discovered, he kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of desperate farewells or uncertain futures, but a kiss of homecoming, of quiet joy, and of a new chapter just beginning. She had shared her lunch with a man who seemed to have nothing, and in return, he had given her not just a letter, but a map to a different kind of life, a life filled with purpose, courage, and a love she never expected to find. The scent of old paper and salt air filled her lungs, and for the first time in a long, long time, Clara felt truly, completely free. Thanks for watching. If you believe in second chances and real love, Give this story a like and subscribe for more.